Thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. Today, we will be talking about finding the right mix for your flipped learning experience. My name is Beth Marcellus, and I am the Instructional Design Team Lead for the Education and Technology Innovation Support Office. And joining me today to talk about flipped learning is Dr. Linda McCauley, who's an instructional designer at the ETI. So, we're talking today about finding the right mix for your flipped learning experiences. A lot of the techniques that you use for flipped learning can also work when you're just trying to incorporate more active learning into traditional teaching. So although the focus is flipped learning, hopefully you can pick up some tips and tricks that you can use for other types of teaching as well. And now I'd like to give you some time to look at the goals for the session. So first, take a little time to read this definition. And after you've all read it, I'll talk a little bit about the key elements of it. Now, traditionally, in a traditional classroom, traditional teaching, the instructor would teach students something in class and then give the students homework that would lead them to interact with the content, either to ensure that they know the content or to give them an opportunity to apply it. In the flipped model, that is actually reversed, so that the initial exposure to the content occurs outside of the classroom, and during class, the students dig deeper into the content, generally using active learning techniques. So what does this mean? This reversal allows the instructor to choose what the students learn about the material by providing that initial exposure via a video or a set of readings or some other material, but it also then allows the instructor to see what the students are doing with the content once that foundation has been laid. And as noted in the definition, there are a number of active learning techniques you can use during the in-class session, and Dr. McCauley will discuss some of those in a few minutes. So the in-class session in flipped learning helps learners to move towards the attainment of higher order objectives. Keep that in mind as you start thinking about flipping a lesson. You want one that will benefit from that application and interaction with the content while you are present. So, why would you want to choose the technique? There's a lot of benefits to flipped learning, both for you and the students. First off, flipping allows you to ensure that when the students are moving to the higher order thinking, they have the same level of baseline knowledge. You're the one who determines what they need to know, and you give it to them. So as you know, students can start from a variety of different levels, but in a flipped classroom, for the material that you're covering, they will be starting at the same level because you've provided them with the material they need to do that. Flipping also allows for more frequent and real-time assessment and feedback. So instead of watching students while you lecture on material and assessing comprehension by how they look, if you can even see them, they may be on Zoom and blacked out, you can actually watch them instead while they're working through the material. So you can really get a feel for whether they're getting it. And then you can also provide timely feedback. Now, research suggests that feedback is most effective when it's provided as soon as possible after the students do the work. And flipped learning in the classroom allows you to be able to provide that feedback very quickly after they've done it. And it allows you to correct any errors or misconceptions before they have a chance to take root. Flipping also allows you to watch the students' work so you can see whether or not they're attaining the desired outcomes. You can then make any adjustments you need if you find the activity is not getting them where they need to be. And finally, as we think about the growth of artificial intelligence, when a student submits work, we may start to wonder about whether they did the work themselves. In a flipped classroom, we can monitor that the work is actually being done by the student. And getting back to assessment, we can ask them about it as they do it to determine if they really understand what they're saying. Thinking about it from the student perspective, it allows students to gain foundational knowledge at their own pace. so they can spend as little or as much time as they need. You've provided them video readings and some information about what they need to get out of it. So they can just take as much time as they need to learn it so that they will eventually be able to build on it and apply it effectively, rather than kind of going at your own pace at a lecture where they don't really have the ability to really stop and think or get to other material that they might need. The flipped classroom outside the classroom experience gives them a little more control over the pace of that learning. Flipped learning can also improve critical thinking ability. Evidence suggests that engaging with the content more actively can help students to develop critical thinking skills. So, with a flipped classroom, students can tackle more challenging application tasks during class, when we as faculty members are present to answer questions and provide guidance, rather than when they're studying at home. So when they're interacting with the material, if they have questions, instead of having to send an email or try to sort it out for themselves, they can actually ask you while you're there. So that can really help them get to know the material better. It can also, studies suggest, improve clinical competence, just as it can improve critical thinking by providing opportunities for guided application. Flipping can help students to improve their clinical competence. In one study, in fact, students in flipped and health sciences classes outperformed their traditionally taught counterparts by about half a standard deviation. As well, flipping can increase student engagement and satisfaction. Because it generally includes an active learning component, students do become more engaged in the material. They're actively engaging with it rather than just passively being lectured to. And studies indicate that this active engagement can also increase their satisfaction. And finally, by getting students used to doing at least some of their learning of foundational material on their own, and also requiring collaboration with others, it prepares them for this sort of independent and lifelong learning and collaboration with others that's going to be a crucial part of their careers. So it really does help them get used to the kinds of things they'll need to be able to do once they get out of school.
So one of the things that you need to think about as we move from theory that Beth was kind enough to give us into actual practice is the place to start typically is thinking about what decisions for what content goes in class and what content and activities will be best suited for out of class. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to take a look at some ways to make those important decisions to make sure you get the blend and the flip correct. First off, you need to remember that when you flip learning, you have to maintain your credit hours. It's very easy to assign work outside of class and then still have all those class time hours on top of it. And then in the end, realize you have now given students enough hours for, a double the amount of credits they're actually earning. So be very careful that as you are planning this, you maintain credit hours so that you don't overwhelm the students for the amount of credits they are enrolled in. You also need to consider what is suitable for flipping. So you don't need to flip an entire course. You can just flip pieces of your course that are best suited for flipping. Certain topics are easier than others. Certain types of activities are easier than others. It would be very difficult to flip a lesson where you had to have hands-on learning in a classroom because you need the hands-on learning. So as we think about this in more detail, you'll see ways that you can accomplish a flip and still have those really engaging active activities, but also accomplish some of the content outside of class beforehand. And then maybe the biggest decision point is, do you curate content that already exists for the pieces that the students are doing outside of class, or do you create content and the time involved in doing that? So flipping definitely does have a time commitment that is heavily front-loaded in course design before the course begins. So you do have to think about how you are going to pull this off and if you have enough time to do so, because you can't just walk into the classroom and give the lecture you've always given if you're going to flip a class. And you have to think about, do you have time to create that content for students to use outside of class, or to curate the content they need to review outside of class to be prepared for the active learning activities that you'll now do in class. So to help us with this, take a look at this worksheet. This is just a screenshot example so that you can get a sense of what we're going to do here today when you think about how to split up what's outside of class versus what's in class. And it will help you think about that split. And we're going to be looking first at columns A and D, which is the activities that the students will do in column A for outside of the class, and then in column D for in class. And then we're going to move into more about that accountability piece, which is columns B and E, a little bit later. So now that we know we've got a document to help us plan, let's start thinking about making some of those decisions. We have to align our learning strategies and activities with our objectives and assessments. So as you do this, and as you begin to plan, you want to make sure you ask yourself some of these questions. What are the most important things students should learn? In other words, the content. That's the essential information that students need in order to meet the objectives. Which activities will help them master and demonstrate what they've learned? That's practice. So one of the things you have to think about is, as you plan these lessons, just assigning readings, for example, may not adequately prepare students to meet your course objectives, because they actually need to do something to practice and show they know. So think about what activities they would need to master and demonstrate those learning objectives. And then last, how will students demonstrate that they have actually learned it? That's where you actually assess them and give them a test or some other activity that you are going to grade or assess to know that they've actually met it. So as you think about these three pieces, content, practice, and assessment, all three are very much needed as you plan a flipped lesson, or any lesson, quite honestly. And as you continue to think about how you're going to divide up your content and activities, you're going to make the best use of your class time and the best use of students' focus time on the pre-work or homework that you give them to do to answer all these questions and meet your goals and objectives for your course. So we have to think about first what's outside of class. As you decide what is done outside of class, some types of things that are better suited for that pre-work or their outside of class piece is didactic or one-way content, often lecturing. Those pieces that are more lower level blooms or are for disseminating knowledge are better or more effective for outside of class. Things that allow students more time to master fit really well outside of class, because remember, they have as much time as they need or are willing to devote to that learning when you assign it as the outside of class piece, because they're in control of the time limit. When you're in class just doing a lecture, for example, if a student didn't understand a concept, you need to move on because you're only in that classroom for a certain amount of time. But if you can move that content to outside of class, the students can rewind, slow it down, speed it up, review, whatever they need in order to master that content. And anything that might be more self-directed learning obviously is better for outside of class, because the students are then self-directed in their own processes and learning so that they can understand the concept and master those concepts. And then last, preparation and foundation for active learning in class. And this is probably the most important bullet on the slide. As we move later on into that accountability column, this is key. And as many of you mentioned in the pre-survey that we did at the beginning, you're worried about how to make sure students actually do this work that you assign outside of class. And this is the key piece. If doing the work is required for success inside the classroom, then they are going to be more likely to do it. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we go along. Bottom line, you can also ask yourself some questions that out of class work are things that students should discover for themselves, might be more efficient for students to be introduced to course content, or there are things that students should ask to be done alone or independently. Those kinds of activities, those kinds of readings, those kind of content are the things that are best suited for outside of class. And then for inside class, it builds upon those out of class assignments like I was just talking about. So the work you do in class is essential. It is essential to have done those outside of class assignments in order to actually do the work in class. Involves active learning. Has an application of the knowledge that they gained outside of class. So it's higher level blooms. It extends their knowledge. And it benefits from you, from the faculty guidance and feedback that you can provide while you are there in the class with them. And it also benefits from discussion or collaboration from other learners. So think about the kinds of activities that you would do in class that fit all these descriptions. And maybe it's things that fit the question of when should I tell students something? Or when should I show students how to do something? Or when should I ask students to work together? So if your activities or content fits those types of things, those types of questions, then that's what you want to put inside the class. Things like case studies, group presentations, projects, discussions, labs, simulations, role plays, games, all fit really well inside the classroom in a flipped model. So now we're ready to start thinking about how we can apply some of this content in our actual teaching. So think about a lesson you teach and that you might consider flipping. And what do you want students to know and be able to do at the end of the lesson? So at the end of what you give them outside of class and inside of class, what do you want them to know and be able to do? And then how will you know that they can actually do it? And then think about writing down how you might divide up that lesson for what is in and out of class on that worksheet, looking at just columns A and D, keeping in mind that the worksheet has multiple rows in it for multiple lessons. We're not asking you to necessarily fill in everything. But definitely take a stab at least one idea and fill in columns A and D.
So first, we want to talk a little bit about, at this point, what you can do to make flipped learning effective. And that does get at this point of how do you take it. Hopefully we can compress it a little bit more than that 4 years if you take some of the ideas that we're going to give you in the next hour or so. So first off, as Linda said earlier in the session, good teaching is good teaching. So many of these techniques will be effective as in-class activities for non-flipped lessons. A lot of what we do to make flipped learning effective is what we would do to make any kind of teaching effective, anything that you're doing with collaboration, anything you're doing with active learning in the classroom. They will work well in a flipped environment as well. So don't get in that mindset of, oh my gosh, I'm flipping my class. It's something completely new and different. It's nothing I've ever done before. There's a lot of techniques that you probably already have under your belt that you can use to try to make these very effective in-class activities. And you also know what students need to do to make that effective. And that helps you plan the outside of class activities. You may find after you work on it a little bit, that the students may like the flipped classroom better than anything else, because it really does give them the chance to engage with the material and to have some back and forth with you, their faculty, their mentors, on learning how to apply this material effectively. And that's what's going to take them through their careers. So also, and I know Linda said this earlier as well, start small. You don't need to flip an entire class. You can just do a little bit at a time. Find things that you know are going to work well, that students they need to engage with intensely, or something that you've seen over the years they have problems with. You give them a problem set or homework and they come back and they say, I just didn't get this at all. And you realize that if you'd been there to help them do it, they might have gotten it. That's the kind of thing that you can really think that just starting small with something like that can really help get them where they need to be. But really, probably one of the most important things about flipping and making flipping effective is planning. You have to be very deliberate in planning the work outside of the classroom and planning the work inside the classroom so that they reinforce each other. So they really are focusing more on the sort of foundational content, lower, if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, those lower level objectives are what you can have them get at outside the classroom, so that inside the classroom, that's when you can move into those higher levels of application. And you have to plan effectively so that those two pieces come together. And another really important element of getting students to be able to do this effectively is articulating the rationale. Let them know. Don't just sort of say, hey, we're flipping the classroom, or worse yet, just say, hey, go read this outside of class. We're doing something different in class next time. Think about, working it into your curriculum. Let the students know early on. Maybe your flipped classroom is a month into the session. Let them know at the beginning as you're going over the syllabus, hey, a lot of times we're doing what you're used to doing in the classroom, but when we get to this topic, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about it outside of you're going to do something outside of the classroom, and then we're going to spend a lot more time applying it inside the classroom. Let them know that it's coming. As Linda said, you want to prepare, make sure you're not overworking them and to get to do those activities. But really prepare them for what's coming far in advance. And then as it's approaching, make sure they know, hey, we've got that flipped session next week. Remember, you're going to need to spend some time doing this outside of the classroom, and then we're going to spend time inside the classroom. Keep in mind, and these are adult learners, they want to know why they're doing what they're doing. If you spring something new on them, talk to them about it. And really let them know about the benefits. So that's an important part of this preparation. Don't just say we're doing this because you need to do it, but really let them know this is a method that's been shown to be effective. And there's been a lot of research in health sciences work that it can really help them, giving them the opportunity to practice what they're doing in a structured environment can really help them long term. So now that we know what we've got to do for planning, what we need to really do to help the students understand this is something that's going to be helpful for them in the long term, there's a few other things that you can do, more specific things to help them get ready. And so one of the things to know is that this really does require some active work on the part of students. So self-regulated learning has 4 phases, and you can work with the students throughout the phases. And the more you can do to support them during these phases of self-regulated learning, the more easily they'll be able to move into and do the learning themselves. So the first phase is planning. So you can see the 4 phases: planning, learning, self-assessment, and monitoring. So the planning phase will consist of the learners setting goals and devising a schedule to engage in the learning materials. And you can support them with this, right? As we said, let them know it's coming. Let them know, hey, you're going to need a little time to do this. It's going to take you about this much time outside of class to do it. So they know, and this is what you need to know to be able to do it. As you set them up effectively for that planning, that can let them know what they need to do outside the classroom. And then that's that second phase of self-regulated learning, the learning phase, when they're actually going through the materials you've given them. And they know that you've set it up for them so that it's important and they need to know it for the next phase of class. In the third phase, that's some self-assessment for them, where they can evaluate. If you've helped them set some goals, then they can assess whether they're attaining those goals with the material you've given them. And they should also be monitoring, right, at the whole time they're going through this. So it is an active, even though sometimes people think, oh, I'm watching a video, it's a passive activity. The more you can do to help them set up and make it more active, the more they can make it a really effective learning experience for them. So when sufficient guidance is provided, it can help motivate them to learn. So they know, yeah, right. You know, if they set their goals and they can see that they're getting their goals, that can keep them enthusiastic about doing it. Another really crucial thing, as you can imagine from what I've been saying, though I haven't said it explicitly, it's crucial to provide clear instructions and expectations. That's really one of the most important elements of success. And this comes in a lot of ways. One of the most important things is putting the information down so that they know exactly what they're supposed to get out of the video. It allows them to start planning so they really can get into the learning effectively, especially for the pieces they're doing on their own. They need instructions for both inside and outside, but for the pieces they're doing on their own, they really need to know. They're not going to be able to, they don't know what they need to be able to do unless you tell them. So you need to say, if you're doing this reading, here's 3 of the things that you might need to do as you're going through this reading. Here's the things, here's what we're doing in class, and here's how this is going to help you get there. So if you can't do A, B, and C, you may need to go back and revisit, or, you know, if you want to put it in more positive terms, make sure by the end of this that you know these 3 things, that you can identify these 6 techniques or something. Just really tell them exactly what they should be getting out of that outside of class session. Equally important is to provide that in-class experience for them so that they can really interact with the content, interact with their peers, interact with you. Make sure that the session, Linda gave you a few ideas earlier of the kinds of things you can do. Make sure that the in-class session really does require that engagement with the material so that they know when they get into the classroom, that's what they're going to be doing. And they need to know they need to know what you told them so that they can get into the classroom and do those active techniques effectively, right? So that they need to know enough that they can talk with their peers about things, or they can complete any activities. It's important to help the students relate what they're doing in the classroom to their prior knowledge. So that's an important element of preparing them for the active learning experience, and help them when you're in the classroom with them, relate what they're learning to what they knew before, and make connections between abstract concepts. These are things that may be clear to you, but it's not clear to your students. So be sure that you're always drawing those connections for them to help them learn to make those connections for themselves.
The more you can articulate what you're doing and why you're doing it, the more likely your students are going to be successful and more positive about the experience. We can't assume that they understand all those connections and planning pieces that we've done before the course started on their own, especially because, as some of you have mentioned, they're expecting to come to class maybe and hear a lecture or be more passive. And so it is uncomfortable for them to have this process put in place because it might not be what they were expecting. So the more that you can articulate why you're doing it and the benefits of it, the more likely your students are going to be successful and more pleased with the experience that you have explicitly planned for them. And to help us get there, in all my years of teaching, I've realized that it is the connection piece that is key. So Beth, I'm going to let you explain this piece so that we can make sure everybody has this really important concept.
Right. Thanks, Linda. And keep in mind that as you look at the worksheet, it's making connections between the activity and what they're learning from it, both outside the classroom and inside of the classroom. So this connection is kind of built into that worksheet. As you fill it in, you should be drawing those connections, and you'll want to make sure that they're explicit to the students. As I said before, you may know these connections yourself, but the students don't know them yet. So make sure you focus on those connections as well. First off, remember that the goal of flipping is to give students the opportunity to apply what they learned and attain a specific outcome. So it is crucial that you've designed an in-class activity that makes the connection clear, so that what's done outside of class flows into what's done inside of class, and let the students know that, right? So that they know you need to do this outside work so that when you come into the classroom, you can do these things. And talk about the relationship between what is outside of the class and inside of the class. That motivates them to do the outside of class work. I know that's one of the things that people were asking questions about in that background survey. How do you motivate students to do the work outside of class? If they know what they're doing inside the classroom, that can be a big help. If you say to them, okay, when we come into the classroom, you're going to be doing A, B, and C. Then they know, oh, well, if I'm going to be doing this, I do need to know that in advance. So that's a really important motivator for them. So in addition to the clear explanation of the activities, some tools for engaging these students actively in the connection process include what you see up here: assessment, collaboration, application. So have them in assessment answer a few questions or complete an activity that demonstrates the link between outside and inside the classroom. So maybe, have them answer a few questions about a diagnosis so they know they can make that diagnosis inside the classroom if you're doing some case-based work, or some of the symptoms. Make sure they can make the connection between symptoms and diagnosis outside of the class so that they know that they can do it inside of the class. Another element of making those connections is collaboration, communicating with others to ensure that if you're going to talk to others about what you're doing, you need to make sure that you know it pretty well yourself. So design activities that require them to explain what they've learned, explain what they're doing, or communicate with others about what they're doing so that they have to know it in advance and that they have to start drawing those connections for themselves. And again, as we've been saying, these application activities really are where you start connecting the sort of theoretical idea to the actual work that they'll be doing, not just inside the classroom, but obviously outside the classroom in their future careers. So think about the connections between those and make those connections explicit. We're not just telling you to do this application activity because we want to make sure you did the reading. We're giving this to you because it's the kind of thing you will need to know how to do in the future as you work outside the classroom. So think about now, the faculty role is crucial in all learning, but especially in the flipped learning experience, there's a few things that you'll need to do to help make it effective. So first, for the outside of class session, this is kind of summarizing some of the things we've talked about already. Prepare the materials. Make sure that you have effective learning materials. A lot of people will do this by creating a video. You may have some readings that are good too. But the really important thing is not just putting that information together for them, but letting them know what they should be getting out of those materials. Also, make sure you're available to support the students. So we've talked a lot about how inside the classroom, you're there to answer the questions and talk about talk about what they're doing, but they may have some questions outside the classroom as well. And this is something we're all used to doing. Just, make sure you're available to support, make sure there's some time for whether you have office hours or you're responding to email, give them the material in enough time that they have time to ask you questions through whatever method works for them outside the classroom. Also, if you acknowledge their pre-work, that can help. Make sure you let them know, if they sent something in that you received it. If they posted questions on a discussion board, you at least acknowledge that they've done the pre-work. That's an important element of your out-of-class role. So then if you think about the in-class role, again, clearly describe the learning activities, make sure that they know what they're supposed to be doing. You're around to make sure they're doing it, so monitor what they're doing. Make sure if there's certain things that they need to be doing to get to the end point you need them to get to, keep an eye on the clock and make sure that they're doing that. Walk around the room. If you see people who are done early, you can give them some sort of extension activities. Oh, wow, you got that pretty quickly. So how would you do this? How would you do that? Or, the same thing. If you see students who are struggling, you can work with them. Just make sure you're around and you know what the students are doing. And then, of course, provide feedback. If they got something a little bit wrong, go ahead and correct it for them. If they're getting everything right, you can talk about real world examples. And again, give them some extension material. And also continue to explain how what they're doing fits into their clinical practice. So you can keep them enthusiastic about the material for now and let them know that this is the kind of thing they need to know how to do later on. And then finally, of course, you want to collect evidence of learning, some sort of assessment at the end to ensure that they've attained the outcomes that you wanted them to achieve with this lesson. Is a crucial final part of flipped learning. And I'm going to pass it over to Linda now to talk about some more specific strategies for supporting students and making flipped learning a success.
And hopefully as we go through some of this, it might address the question that pre-work is key and about students feeling overwhelmed. So before we dive into some specific strategies to help students stay accountable for some of that pre-work, remember, maintain credit hours. So if you're going to put significant content as their pre-work before they come to class for an active session, you need to think about how you're going to give back some time. So if the class normally meets for 3 hours, maybe you're going to say that first hour we're not meeting because that hour was spent watching a lecture outside of class. So we do want to make sure students don't feel overwhelmed because they are legitimately overwhelmed. So double check yourself and make sure that you are watching your credit hours so that it is reasonable. And then think about ways you can help the students to stay accountable for that pre-work because everybody's busy and distractions are everywhere. So we have to make sure that we keep students focused and engaged on the recorded lectures or the readings that we've given them outside of class. So here's some other ideas as well. The first one is called the pause procedure. And for that out of class work, as you have students working through something, tell them to pause every 12 to 18 minutes. And then they should rework or review their notes so far, and then note any areas of confusion for discussion in class. The key here is that you are having them do something while they are completing that pre-work content so that they continue to pay attention and also allow for them to get that support or help they need for anything that they might be confused about when they come to class. Note here that we are not re-lecturing what they were supposed to do in the pre-work. We are clarifying confusion, and that is very different. We'll talk more about that as we go along too, because it's one of the pitfalls as we get into flipped. We want to make sure we don't redo the pre-work in class. Another idea is called retrieval practice. And in this strategy, every 15 minutes, the students should pause and write everything. In other words, a brain dump that they can remember from the preceding segment of the video that they just watched or the reading that they just read, and they just write as much as they can remember. And again, then they have that as a way to refer back to or to ask questions when they come to class. The next strategy is called knowledge checks. We know this one already, so this probably isn't new to most folks, but this is where you ask students to answer a few objective questions for self-assessment after each chunk or concept that you are having them review. Now, a caution about this, because this is one of the easier things that you can implement when you use flipped learning. But be careful, because some students are known to just read or watch what they've been assigned to simply get the perfect score on the self-assessment or the knowledge check. And so they've been misguided a little bit, maybe in their previous learning experiences, that it's all about the outcome, it's all about the grade, and not so much about the actual understanding and the learning. So if you're going to use knowledge checks, make sure you tell them that those knowledge checks are not the be-all end-all. They're just a way to monitor your understanding, and they still need to actually watch the whole video, not just scrub through it looking for the answers to the questions. Another nice way to engage your students that allows them some more control or engagement in the actual learning process is to have them create test questions. So student-generated test questions is a fantastic strategy, because as students are learning their material independently, they then write several possible test questions on that material. And the buy-in there is that those test questions might show up on the actual test. And of course, they will know the answer because they wrote it. So that's a highly motivating activity for students to create the questions, but it also gives you a lens into what they think is most important. And so if they're writing questions about things that are trivial or less important and focused, you can bring that up then when they come to class after you've reviewed those and realize, hey folks, we also need to think about this or that, and go into some more details so that they understand they're kind of stuck in things that maybe aren't as most important to you. And then the last strategy is really providing incentive. Here, if we give some reason to do the pre-work, whether it's just a few participation points, or even if it's just pass fail, hey, I did this, I engaged in this, I don't need to be right or perfect, but I did the work, I processed through these concepts. It will help students stay engaged with that pre-work. Just by attaching a few points to the work increases the likelihood that they will do it. But again, I'm going to say it again, make sure that you're careful that students don't just study enough to be able to pass the knowledge check or the assessment, or to just hand in the pre-work thing that you've assigned, because they need to know, and you have to continue to articulate, it's not about just getting this little activity done or getting the knowledge check right. It's about really knowing and understanding the content so that they can be prepared, not just for the in-class activities, but for their career in the future. So because accountability is so important, and because most of the questions that came in our knowledge probe at the beginning related more to motivation and accountability for students to actually do the work we assigned in a flipped session, we do want to spend some time talking as a group about this. And before we open it up for your comments, keeping in mind that as we plan these flip sessions, our goal is to make sure students meet objectives. And so we need to think about, how do we handle a student who is unprepared? Because you know it's going to happen. And how do we even handle that student who is absent? So, best laid plans, you give them all this pre-work and they're ready to come to class for an in-class active session, and then somebody gets sick. So both of those situations, we have to think about and plan for flipped learning to be most effective. Well, then I'm going to move on to a slide that summarizes some key ideas that'll help perhaps if you find, if you want to know if the students are doing the work, or what do you do if they didn't do the work. First off, if you're doing recorded lectures and videos in Panopto, you can review those video stats. So you can get a sense if the students are actually watching the videos, and have private conversations with students who may not be, or who may be not really prepared for class in a meaningful way. So you can help them learn how to learn independently so that they can be successful. Some of this is just teaching students how to learn perhaps in a different way. You can collect some of that pre-work, those strategies that we suggested you try. You can actually collect that work to show that you are going to review it quickly. And again, it still may be pass fail, or it may just be a couple points, like we see there in the third bullet, reward points for pre-work. It could just be the piece between, say, an A and a B, a couple points over the course of a semester. The folks that are doing the work and bringing in the pre-work and giving it the effort you expect are going to be able to get that higher grade. And the students who are not might be at the next lower letter grade just because of the participation points you're providing for that pre-work, because it is so important. Providing points for it adds validity to actually completing it. One of the strategies that I've used if students are coming unprepared is, if they have to go off and do something else independently and they don't participate in the in-class active activity, or if they do participate, they don't get credit because they were not prepared to participate fully. So it does hurt, yes. But I almost can guarantee you, if the first time they do it and they don't get credit, or you ask them to sit in the back of the room to actually complete the video or complete the reading so that they can come back and join the group, they'll learn that you're serious, that that homework that you gave them wasn't just for fun, it was required. So coming up with some type of an alternate activity is a good idea, or putting them in a separate space so that they can actually do the pre-work instead of participating is a way that you can remediate that. And my guess is once they see you're serious, they won't do it again. But also, if you do have an alternate activity that students could do independently, those are the things that are great for when students are absent. Because the last thing you want to have to do is like reteach a session that you did as an active learning session again because somebody was sick. Or what else could you give the students to do so that they could still meet the objectives of the session, even though they weren't able to be present because they were sick.
And I just want to jump in, and a lot of these do benefit from your planning the session so that you have enough time between the time that you've assigned the work to them and the time you have time to check. So, it's not just do this work the night before and then maybe I'll check the video stats the day after, or, do the work the night before and give me your pre-work, that morning, and then we've got class at 9. Make sure there's enough time for you to work in, a couple of days to do the pre-work, and then that you can sort of check in and remind them, hey, I see that a lot of people have done the pre-work, but a lot haven't. So let's make sure you're ready for class. So anything that you're doing is going to benefit if you're able to give them time so that you can check in to make sure they're doing it.
And like was shared earlier, just keep repeating yourself. Broken record technique. This is why we're doing it. This is when we're doing it. This is what you need to know. Because the more you repeat it, the more likely they're going to understand this shift in thinking, so that they're prepared. And as we think about those keys to success, and we kind of bring closure to the concepts we've been talking about today, the keys to success really are don't fall into that trap of lecturing on the content that was assigned outside of class. Because if you do that and you just say, oh, well, they didn't do it, so I guess I'm going to go default back to my usual lecture anyway, and I'm not going to do all those activities. The students now learn they don't have to do the work, and they will still get the content. So be careful of that. That's probably the number one pitfall of folks who are starting to do flipped, that they fall into that trap. So be careful of that. The second tip is to definitely provide focus for those assignments, the readings, the videos, so that they know what to focus on. They know what they need to be able to do, so that they can be focused on what's important and not just feel like they've gotten dumped on lots of homework to do. Provide opportunities during the class time for the students to apply that content knowledge that they did outside of class. That is key. Make sure the in-class components are active, are application, are higher level, so that they have a reason to have learned the background knowledge first, to be prepared to participate in class. And as we keep saying, communicate the importance of knowing to the students, because in our professions, when someone's life is on the line, you have to know. It's not just to get the grade. It's not just to say you did it. It's because you actually have to know to be able to save someone's life.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.